It's very kind of you. Yeah, it's that little kitchen bit, but Ennis is definitely a way to exciting. There's a frame. Oh, right. It's not like I'd say before I grow up or something like that. No, it's not so good. No. Unless it gets expensive taste. Sexual truffles or something. Big hot, terrible scandal.
Good evening, everybody. As you can see, Councillor Ahmed, Nadeem Ahmed, is not here. I think you know the background as to why he's not able to attend today. So you need to appoint a chairman for the meeting. So are there any nominations, please?
Are you alright? You coming?
I'll nominate Councillor Goldthorpe.
I'll second that.
All in favour? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Goldthorpe?
Thank you, Philip. Yes, I noticed we've got two gentlemen down for speaking. So I'll go through the initial bits of this, declarations of interest, and then, if it's okay with everybody, we might as well bring forward the three items that, two items that Charles Oakes wants to comment on, and one that Abdul Rahman wishes on the land at 44 Brunswick Street. So if that's okay with everybody, that'll be fine. Any declarations of interest? No? Councillor
Chairman, it's not a prejudicial pecuniary interest, but in terms of the item 8, I am a director of the Pendle joint venture, which is referenced.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's another.
Same here.
Same as well. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Same as me, yeah?
Yeah.
Pendle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Anything else?
Okay.
Okay. Public question time. Is there anybody else wants to speak other than the two gentlemen that's already put their names down about any issues? No? Okay. Minutes of the last meeting. Could we agree on those, please?
Yeah, I'll move them.
Second. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, right, so we will bring item, where are we? We'll do it in 7 and 8, 6 and 7.
6 and 7.
We will bring forward first, if we may. Right, number 6, Acne Carriage unmet demand survey. Mr. Oates. Seen him somewhere there, right? Would you like to comment on this?
Depending on the outcome of your deliberations tonight on this matter, there is just one point that I'd like to bring to your attention, saving the council probably money and time. Back in, I think, 2014, Chair, you did an unmet demand survey, and the people who did that survey will have all the information relating to that survey, which will help if you do agree tonight to do a survey. That will help, and that will save costs as well, because the cost is in the work that they do. Now I know that somebody called Ian Millership, who now works for CTS in Preston, did the survey. He is a guy that is robust, his reports are robust, the reports will stand scrutiny, and I just put that in for you tonight just to try to help the process. that's really all I want to say. I hope, members, that you agree this tonight, and let's move forward with it. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Okay,
Chair.
Just sorry.
Just as a point of order, you said one, but I've got two.
Yes, no, on the next
item.
next item.
Yeah.
Would 2014 be relevant?
It will be to some degree. The normal procedure on this is that we would invite people, you know, an open process of people putting bids in to do the work, and obviously we would inform that company who did that last time, and if they wanted to do it again, we can put forward a bid.
Okay. Councillor Asman, have you anything to say on that?
Well, as the officer just mentioned, 2014, and in the report it says a survey to be conducted. So which way we're going to go for? Is it just wait for the information, or is it just go for the report?
You need to approve
Yeah,
the survey.
Yeah.
are willing to move it forward, as the officer have put in the report.
Okay, Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you, Chair. You know, we're welcome to actually this report. You know, I think usually I think that within the legislation, I think it has to be carried out. You can carry out within maximum of 3-year period. You know, I think it overhauls the licensing process. And you know, brings back safeguarding much better. That's the other one, too.
Yeah, the next one
The
down.
next one,
We're going to that next. But do you want to second this?
But I can second the, I think it's very much needed though. I think, like I say, every 3 years we should ideally be carrying out one of these surveys.
Okay.
And it safeguards you know, the general public. So we welcome the
Good.
report.
Councillor Nee?
Support it.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. Just for my information. How long does this take?
Time. There's a piece of string.
So obviously we approved it today. What, 4 months, 2 months, 6 months?
I would imagine that, bearing in mind you know, you need a month to invite bids to do it. Probably take about 3 months to undertake it, and another month to do the report and leave that. So I think we're talking about by the end of the year.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you,
so
Chair.
Councillor Aslan's proposed it. Councillor Mahmood's seconded it. All in favour? Thank you. Right, Mr Oakes, you've got your second. Where's he gone? He's hiding behind Councillor Whip.
Yes.
Would you like to comment on the item 7?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions for the officer. This is a very useful tool in the private hire trades. On page 2, the financial position, I'm somewhat complexed by that because the NR3 or the NAFN, whichever one it's being called, it's up and operational, but it won't be totally online until towards the end of the year. And therefore I was a bit surprised to see the annual fee for this at £1,600 per year. How that can be reached until completion of the whole thing, and it is live, but it'll come fully live when it's finished. So that concerns me. The other thing that concerns me, Chair, is it says, and recovered from the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licensing fees, but there is no mention of private hire operators. It would have been nice to see that wording in there, including private hire operators, because they're under this as well. They can lose their licences, so no doubt they will be put on that register. So I think that they should bear some of the cost of that, and I'd like to see that put in before it goes live in the other. But anything else about that, we totally agree with that.
Good. Point well
Thank
made,
you.
Mr. Oates. Any comments on Mr. Oates' views?
I think it's sensible, Chair.
Okay, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Could we have a proposal then?
Yeah, I'll propose this for the safeguarding of the road safety and the drivers and the passengers.
And including
And including the
operators?
operators.
Good. Second it? Councillor
Yeah,
McBurney.
thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I'll happily second the
Thank you.
recommendation. No, welcome the changes. I think this will improve like sharing of data on taxi drivers between local authorities. And I think it's for peace of mind as well for constituents using the services. You know, that people have been properly vetted. They've gone through a proper process, and it's for their general safety. And they have better protection, generally speaking. The only thing I will say is that on page 4, there's some things on there. Say for example, at the bottom of page 4, it says poses a risk to road safety while driving. How will you define something like that? Or, in brackets, again, in that bottom paragraph, it says regardless of whether the person was charged with, prosecuted for, or convicted of the offence. How do we kind of define that kind of thing? How do we prove something like that? Do we actually need that by law? Or
And if you look over the page, top page 5, it says further detail on what driver conduct constitutes a safeguarding or road safety concern can be found in the Act. I'm not expecting to read the Act, so I'll ask Ian Watson or Jackie Allen to drop your line to explain.
Yeah, that's right.
Would that be
As long as it's
circulated?
covered, and I think you can make a reference to that then. I see what you mean.
It's on page.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Okay. So, we've got a proposal, a second. Everybody in favour of that? Excellent, thank you very much. Right, back to the agenda, I guess. Oh, yes, of course. Item, where is it now? What number is it?
13.
13C. We've got Abdul Rahman. Would you like to make any comments to the
Yeah, it's just
committee?
obviously the land that's come up for sale.
Yeah, well, it's the one that's on 13C, which is. Yes, that's the one. It's 44 Brunswick Street.
Yeah. So I've got a unit right next to that.
Right.
So obviously I need the land because sometimes I'm getting blocked access going into the unit. So some people are parking the cars there and I can't quite get in. Plus I need parking there, so saying that I'd be interested in.
Okay. Any questions on that one? Councillor Corbin Price?
We have obviously discussed this before, and as you know, I am the chairman of the Climate Emergency Working Group. We went there at tea time. There are beautiful mature trees on this land, and there are 4 parking spaces. But what you see should be really easy for Pendle Council, has the powers to enforce the fact that there are vehicles parked there that shouldn't be parked on a public highway, which they are, and on public land. They can only be parked on private land. One had an enforcement notice on the windscreen, but the rest didn't. So at a stroke, I'm fairly certain Tim Horsley could go tomorrow and organise for about 5 or 6 of those vehicles to be taken away. And then there would be 4 useful spots for residents in an urban area, and what would you say, 4 or 5 beautiful mature trees. You know, we are getting money from the government to create pocket parks and little green oases within our key 1 service centres of Cone and Nelson. How bizarre would we be if on one hand we're planting trees in certain locations, and on another hand, where we have obviously put in effort, you can see there's cobbling, there's effort that's been put in here. On the other hand, we're going and selling these pieces of land that we've nurtured, and those trees and that amenity for residents will disappear. So to me, it's clear that if we enforced, then there would be no problem in terms of your business access. There should never be. There is a clear public way to that business, and also those parking spaces would be available to residents. So I would move that we do not sell this land.
Looking for Councillor Mahmood? No?
I'm not seconding it.
You're not going to second that one? Okay, no comments?
No, I'll make a comment though. I was going to say, I mean, I will go with the original recommendation because this came to, at that time it was Nelson Area Committee. You know, I think the local businesses, they do want to expand. And obviously they made that case at the time, and as an area committee I think we're in favour of that, and I'll move from you know, that we do declare this land as subject to requirement so that local businesses can expand on the site.
We need a second.
Have we got a seconder for the first?
I'll second Sarah's
So-
comments on that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've got a mover and a seconder to not dispose of the land,
Yeah.
and we've got a mover at the moment,
I'll second Councillor
and you're going to second the council. Councillor Witt.
Could I ask Chairman about the background to this? I mean, it wasn't very many years ago there were miscellaneous plots of land which were offered to be community asset transferred from Pendle Council to town councils and parish councils. Was this one of the plots of land identified with that, and has it previously been offered to Nelson Town Council? Does anybody know?
Thanks for that, Councillor Witt. Font of all knowledge.
Everybody's looking at everybody else.
I'm looking at Julia. I don't recall it being on the list, in all honesty. That I can't say for certain.
Chairman.
So it looks like the answers, without delving, is probably not, Councillor Witt.
Yeah, with my former hat on as the chair of the town council, I can confidently say it wasn't on the list.
Okay.
That wasn't on the list.
I've got a compromise suggestion. I
Please,
can't put it on the table, which is that you know, given the diametrically opposed views, that we do ask Nelson Town Council if they have any views or any interest in the land. That the committee has a site visit and then comes back to it in due course, rather than having a polarised decision at this meeting one way or another. So it gives an opportunity for people to look at it, evaluate that you know, its amenity value and possible public rather than private use in future.
Okay. Do we have to go through the rigmarole of the two motions?
Well, I think if there's a general
Agreement that that's the way
agreement
forward.
to do that.
Everybody happy with that?
I'm not happy with that. I think it's clear that there's amenity land for residents. It's clear there are 4 spaces and beautiful trees. But that's just me.
So do you wish to have a vote on your motion?
Yeah, I suppose I do. Perhaps call me trenchant. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Chair, can I just add a comment. There are a couple of issues that I'm puzzled over. Firstly, this came to P&R in June. Why is it back here 2 months later? And secondly, the issue is that the council need to take enforcement action against the vehicles, which it says in paragraph 4 are underway. I cannot see any compelling reason why this has come back to the committee now.
Page 21.
2021. June 2021. Go to the watch.
Oh, 21. Okay.
Please progress, Chair.
Right, so we have to-
You want to vote on
You-
your amendment.
so we'll take the amendment. We take the amendment first. Right, so we got an amendment proposed and seconded that this land is offered for sale. Yeah?
Yes.
That's the thing. So, all in favour of that, please? All those against?
So we'd have to take a vote on that.
So we now have to take a vote on the
Well, at this point,
Substantial.
Chairman, I would put a further amendment in accordance with what I outlined earlier on as
Okay.
a suggestion. So formally propose that so that a decision is deferred, Nelson Town Council are consulted, committee has a site visit and it's reconsidered following that process.
I'll second that, Chair.
So that's proposed and seconded. Okay. So all in favour of that? Right. All against?
It's going to be, yeah, you're just going to
So we now have to go on the substantiative motion. So the motion is that we keep this plot of land and in fact look after it and enforce it. That's the so.
Because in no way do I wish a business to have any problems with access through carelessness of other people when we could do something about it, which we could.
Okay. So that's the proposal, that's the second. All those in favour? All those against? Okay. Right, so that's that one dealt with. We will now go back to the agenda, yeah? And it would be remiss of me going back to the agenda not to mention that not only have I managed to be sat next to Philip, but this is Philip Mousdale's last policy and resource committee attendee officer. And before he goes off and enjoys his well-earned retirement. So I'd like to just put on the minutes a note of thanking Philip for everything he has done and been involved in with the work he's done at Pendle over an extremely long time. I know you've already gone through a similar situation at full council, but I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure there's comments from everybody, and Nadine sends his best wishes as well. Councillor Witt.
Well, Chairman, I'd like to compliment Philip on his work into the bitter end. I understand that his last day is tomorrow, and here he is on a Thursday night covering this meeting. But I just want to put on record that the correct pronunciation is Mosedale rather than Mousdale, which I dare say has irked Philip for any number of years from any number of councillors, and he's never said, hang on, that's not my name. So, he gets a big tick in my book for that.
Yeah. Well said, Councillor Witt. Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just like to say big very big thank you to Philip for all his service to local government, his knowledge, his experience. It's outstanding, you know. I would say he's a walking encyclopedia in my view, you know, especially with the legal side, he's a legal guru.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to miss that.
Absolutely. We should be printing a medal, I would imagine. Councillor Aslan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Mosedale. And I don't think you look old enough to be retiring.
Ah,
Looking at the age-wise, I don't know.
Clean living.
I thought it's not an age, you look very young. And I wish you all the best in your retirement and a healthy life.
Yeah. Well, Philip, you no need to blush anymore now. You're okay.
Chairman.
Just to say that one of, some of you may know that Dean Langton regularly watches the recordings of your meetings. I can assure you I won't be doing that.
Well, I hope so. God. Dean, you got something better to do, mate.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's also important to probably highlight Philip's integral role in keeping the various town and parish councils in this borough alive in terms of the support that we've had from Pendle, especially when dealing with the transfer of services topic. No doubt the current administration must have seen the benefit of Philip's knowledge, the background knowledge, especially some of the miscellaneous pieces of land, for example, which I've looked at the list and I still can't locate. You know, there's clearly so much history there that Philip's obviously written himself, so to speak. So I think it's also important from a town and parish council angle. I'd like to forward my thanks on behalf of Nelson Town Council for all the work and all the support that we've had, and you will be missed. Like all colleagues have said, I don't think anybody's got a bad word to say. So fantastic year, and you will be missed.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you.
Keep smiling.
Well, I'll have an even bigger smile.
Well, and especially, it's all this healthy living you've had.
After all the knowledge you've now got for where all these strange pieces of land are, you can become taxi number 72. There you go. That piece of land, yes, I know where you go.
Right above.
He's already applied for the badge, mate.
Okay.
So the application.
So back to the business in hand, and I'm going to. You've got the Kelbrook and Suff Neighbourhood Development Plan on number 4. Sarah, do you want to?
yeah, I read this with immense interest to see what the inspector had to say about this neighbourhood plan, which has been just deeply considered. I think some of you know I am a regional neighbourhood planning champion and also the chairman of the Cone Advisory Committee. And we're behind these people. So in a sense, this was like a sneak peek. And obviously, very sensibly, it was suggested that the kinds of people who are these independent examiners bring a wealth of experience to make the plan usable. Because neighbourhood plans are put together by people who have their community's interests at heart, but they aren't professional planners. So it has to be written and formulated in such a way that Pendle Council can apply the intentions of Kelbrook and Suff. And you could see that the examiner was helping to facilitate that. And I think, well, I think he's to be praised, but so is the Kelbrook and Suff committee that put this together, which they clearly wrote through love of their community, and all of the tweaks that were put forward, things like taking some of the descriptions of the green spaces and putting them as supporting evidence rather than in the main plan, and some of the sort of making the wording clearer for Pendle Council, all of those obviously should be adopted, and that is the recommendation. We should support this so that it goes out in October to referendum, and we should encourage more of our communities to go on this path, because you discover an awful lot about your community, you discover things that you never knew, you meet people who have a wealth of experience about topics that you couldn't even have dreamt of, And it is a wonderful journey, actually, for all of our villages. And Pendle remains a neighbourhood planning black spot. And the government has given communities this sort of grassroots tool to plan from the bottom up, and we should seize it and promote it within Pendle. And I think it's just a way of getting communities involved. And I sit on these sort of webinars, and some of the other local authorities, who are much bigger, quite often counties, say that they quite often have strategic development sites, big ambitious sites that they've put forward for multi-million pound developments. And then they have little neighbourhood plans of villages. And I've heard more than once people saying, well, blow me, 10 years on, the big development sites for various infrastructure reasons have become far too complicated and haven't been built. Meanwhile, the neighbourhood plans have been quietly delivering houses and homes in places where people want them to be built. And that is a salutary lesson, really. It's getting the community involved so that they put forward those places to see their town develop the best and protect those things, whether they're buildings or green spaces, the most. So I propose that we thoroughly support these recommendations.
Councillor Webb?
Chairman, I'm happy to second the proposal that we accept the examiner's recommended modifications, etc., etc., etc. I don't, however, second Sarah's comments. I find that the neighbourhood development process is very protracted, bound by, if I say, planning bureaucracy. It is hidebound by the rules that are laid down from on high, and far from being planning from the bottom up, which it was intended to be. It is beholden to the national planning policy framework and indeed the Borough Council's planning framework, which is in a state of abeyance at the moment. So we've got an intention for planning to be driven from residents, from communities, but the framework within which they've got to operate is very constrained indeed, and the possibility to move outside that framework is it's zilch, because it wouldn't get past this stage if it didn't fit within both that national framework and local framework. And I think therein lies a bit of a trap for communities. And in this case, we've got Culbrook and Sough that have spent 5 years on this. Now, if the national planning policy framework changes, which it may well do with a new Prime Minister, and we already had a state of flux because the previous government proposals were sort of withdrawn, and the sort of half-hearted national framework, which no one really knows where that's going. And we've got the local policy it's in a state of refreshment, renewal, and no one knows what that's going to say either. So the neighbourhood plan, in this case Culbrook and Sough's neighbourhood plan, may well have to be revised in terms of whatever comes down the line. You know, this isn't sacrosanct. This isn't something that is fixed up until 2030 is the time on this, but it's something that may have to change in the future. Now, with Kelbrook, the development proposals are actually for 2 sites which have already got planning permission, or have had planning permission, because both on Dockcliffe Road, that's a site that got planning approval several years ago, have lapsed in the meantime. And on Cobb Lane, it's one that it was given planning approval by an inspector over the heads of this planning authority. And more recently, we rejected the detailed application, but the principle of development is already there. So in this case, the neighbourhood plan hasn't come up with new proposals for development. It's just restating what's already there. And I think in that sense that may make it acceptable to some villagers. I know that quite a lot of people in Calbrook are vehemently opposed to the Cobb Lane development and remain so. So I'm not quite sure what their attitude will be in terms of the referendum that's got to follow this. So I second the proposal to accept the recommendations. I think that you know, it's the only sensible thing to do, and I just hope that after 5 years, that this can be something that does have some longevity, rather than in a short period of time have to be reviewed again because of changes at a different level, either at the borough level or at the national level.
Okay. Well, just bring Councillor Mahmood in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, this Calbrook and neighbourhood development plan represents a significant step forward in local democracy, and will assist planning committees to make decisions which reflect people's views and on how their local area should be developed and protected. And I think it will also ensure that sustainable development within Calbrook and Suffolk meets the needs of current and future generations while protecting and enhancing the natural and the built environment. And I will support the recommendations of the original report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mahmood.
Just a sort of point of clarification, really. Obviously, it sort of logically makes sense that no neighbourhood plan could go against the National Planning Policy Framework, because then you'd have a series of places that are basically opted out of national planning law. And similarly, it would be just as weird if there was a neighbourhood plan that was totally against anything that Pendle decide, because then it would be like one of those Ealing comedies where people declare a small village a country. It would be like that. So that's why it is. But it's already in action, for example, in Trawden, whereby development that would have been passed by the National Planning Policy Framework and by Pendle Council, it would have been presumption in favour of sustainable development, goes against the Trawden neighbourhood plan, and so it has been turned down in favour of places chosen by Trawden. And I do think that is democracy in action. And personally, I don't think any plan should be set in stone. A lady from the locality rang me up today and she said, are you aware you've got cash in the bank? You can spend it on promotion of your plan during referendum and so on. And she said, as soon as your plan is made, the government will grant Cone £18,000 to talk about the next iteration of the plan. And that's right, because no places stay the same. There is continual change. There shouldn't be a month that the advisory committee of Cone should have off, really. We shouldn't even take a month off. We should be, as soon as the plan is made, I would recommend the same to Calbrook and South. Perhaps they should take a month off, but then the next month they should be right. Okay, what are we doing with our plan? Where are we taking it next? Are we going to make it greener, more resilient, whatever? And I think that is the intention, that the revision is semi-constant as communities react to the outside world, because people were not talking about green issues so much 5 years ago, were they? And they are now. So these plans have to keep pace with people's concerns.
Councillor David Witt.
Nothing further to add.
Okay.
That's it.
Councillor David.
Just a final bit to add on to that one. I think the process of doing the plan, we know the Kelbrook one's taken many years, the Cone one's taken many years as well. Obviously, if we were doing them again now, we'd be a lot faster now because we know what to do. So, sharing that kind of knowledge is there. I think the other thing that I've noticed as well is literally we've had probably thousands of both formal and informal comments from the public who think, well, you councils are drafting this, can we get involved? And they get involved and they say, well, this is a good non-designated heritage asset, a non-listed building. This is a good green space here, and there's a real sense of pride in both the whole town and the areas of the community where these people live.
And knowledge.
So it's really given a lot of people a lot of ownership of the town and pride in the town as well. And it's a good thing, I think.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've got proposed, seconded, and supported around the table, I think. So, everybody in favour of this, please show. Thank you very much. Pendle Council annual emissions. Do you want to kick off with this, Sarah, please, because you're the...
Yes, this is obviously very, very difficult to do, and I praise Jill Dixon for her efforts here. Realistically, as I've said before, it probably wouldn't pass the Radio 4 more or less test, because to do that, we would have to know about the heating bills and ambient temperatures of anybody that ever works from home. You could spend so much of your time doing the analysis that you wouldn't do any of the doing. But this gives us a very clear idea of trends and threats that we're very, very, very aware of, and it feeds into other work that the council's doing, such as the Leisure Services Review, and it helps us move forward from just looking at Pendle Council and moving on to Pendle Council supply chain and moving on to providing thought leadership for Pendle's businesses and Pendle's residents to help them go on the same journey that we're on. It is a really difficult thing to do, and we are clearly on that path, but my goodness, there's an awful lot more to do, and there's an incredible amount of technology to try and finesse and compare against each other, and we can look at other examples and try and learn from best practice. So I recommend that we accept it and note it and thank Jill Dixon.
Any comments on that? Councillor Mahmood and then Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to the report. It touches on Pendle Leisure Trust. We don't have any figures for them. Is that something that we could, considering that we do contribute heavily towards their annual budget, that we could ask them to provide some figures and what they're doing about helping us achieve these targets?
I think this is an area that's scope 3, is it?
Yeah.
It is, yeah, scope 3.
Quite clearly it's an area that needs to be published and be part of the overall. I think that's
moving.
Work in progress, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Yeah.
Councillor Webb?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Previous meetings over the last, 18 months perhaps a bit longer, I've asked about Pendle Council's involvement with the public sector decarbonisation programme. This is a programme government supported which replaces fossil fuel boilers and the like with sustainable, renewable heating sources. And there have been some golden opportunities which have been completely missed by Pendle Council. We had a proposal, last October, November I think it was, where there was a proposal to replace some of the leisure trusts ageing equipment with renewable sustainable technology, which was kicked out, and the funding not made available to do that. Could I ask whether we've made any attempt now to go down the public sector decarbonisation route? Because it's all very well having a report on the annual emissions, which seems to be quite passive. It's not that we're actually acting to reduce emissions. it's just like, you know, we're taking it on the chin sort of thing. Now, I think that's completely contrary to the stated policies of Pendle Council. But when it comes to the crunch, Pendle Council isn't prepared to put the investment in to actually make those CO2 reductions and play its part in either mitigating or reducing the impact of the climate crisis. And a good example was the discussion that we had earlier this month at the council meeting on the 4th of August, when I think it was Councillor Tom Whip's proposal to provide funding for air source heat pumps at a future joint venture housing development in Earby was rejected, unfortunately, with the Labour group abstaining at that point. But you know, that's another example of where we could actually be acting to cut the CO2 emissions and failing to do so. But I wonder, you know, has there been any progress with the programme of public sector decarbonisation? As I say, I've been flagging it up for 18 months, 2 years now, and I keep prodding the administration to say, you know, what are you doing? Are we going to take part? And I get warm words, but I never see any action.
Okay, I mean, there are areas where improvements have been made, there's no doubt about that. Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, the decarbonisation process fund, I think, closed last September, October, and it was a shame, I agree, that Pendle Council didn't put anything in for it, but that's been closed, as far as I know, for the better part of a year. But we heard today about the transformation programme. We'll be hopefully putting in a bid for Salix. I'm looking at Mr Gibson. And this is a really, really hopeful, along similar lines, possibility to aggressively retrofit buildings to make them carbon neutral. And, okay, we haven't won it, we haven't put in for it yet, but we are doing the work towards it, and it is very much on the prioritisation agenda.
Chairman, I can't remember what phase the public sector decarbonisation round was that closed last time, but it was said then that there will be further rounds, and the sensible authorities were actually putting the work in, you know, preparing the ground so that they could put a successful bid in to the next round. So I'm anticipating that there will be further rounds in the future, and, you know, given the current crisis, both long-term and more short-term, immediate crisis, it's absolutely critical that we do so, surely.
I would say that if and when any rounds come up for this area, we will be in amongst them as a matter of priority.
Chairman,
I know you're going to...
The way that it worked last time round was there was a very short window of opportunity.
Yes. Yeah.
The bids were taken in date order that they were received, and once the threshold had been passed,
yeah,
for the value of funding available, no further bids were accepted. So it's absolutely critical that you do your homework beforehand
and I think
get
that's
your bid in early.
I think, Councillor, that's taking place in terms of what's happening within the
transformation programme,
the transformation area.
Right.
And certainly it's not something that's going to be missed. But you can't do something before you've got to plan for it quite clearly, and there's planning taking place now, as we've just heard, in terms of the one that's in
the sailing fund isn't available. It's difficult. You're running a lot of horses at the moment, aren't you? So it's difficult it's getting that planning in advance and looking at the schemes and looking what you can do and looking at the wider estate and how you wanna. And it's grant money, but it doesn't cover all your costs. You've got to gauge what you can go at and what pace you can go at. So that's what needs to be done across the estate.
I just keep on making the plea because you need to do the work in advance in order to benefit.
And I think that's a point well made, Councillor Whip, and I think the work is being done. You can't go back to September and October and reinvent it. We can only apply for what's there and when it's there, and aggressively go after it and don't miss any time slots. Anything else, sir, on that one? No.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Whip is indeed fond of talking about innovative technologies and decarbonisation. And indeed, in principle, we're all in favour of this. However, what is less talked about is the cost. And the cost of that is quite prohibitive at this point in time. Had Councillor Whip talked about this paper and its reflection on progress towards our stated goal of a carbon neutral status by 2030, I would have agreed that the paper does not really provide us any guidance, and I think I would agree it is a rather passive paper. It really could have provided more information to us about our progress towards that 2030 goal. So I take what's in this report. It's perhaps not as helpful as it could be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Stone. Some of the questions I've put down on my papers follow that sort of that approach. What are we doing differently with our gas consumption that we can't be doing with our electricity consumption? Because we see that whilst gas usage has decreased, electricity usage has in fact increased. What is it that we are doing differently? Can we?
It's just the wider decarbonisation of the electricity infrastructure. So as nationally we go to solar, wind, we reduce our, carbon footprint in the wider electricity estate. You basically get that for free in a way because it's the national electricity picture. When gas is obviously carbon technology. So that's the difference.
Through you, Chairman. Richard, the report does however state that the figures around gas usage by PVC is largely explained by a decrease in usage. So
I think that's to be fair, I don't know, but from my recollection of Jill explaining the report, I think it's just a lockdown.
Again,
the centres were short to the gas, and then the consumption will probably, on the gas side, will probably come up now.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I thought we had a change of practice. I don't know, we stopped using traditional heating and we started using electrical heating, for example. Hence, gas consumption went down and electricity consumption went up. So it's not the case.
No, we're still on gas boilers for heating.
Okay, and then the other remarks I have, Chairman, briefly. Could we be improving our electricity usage even further? Whilst obviously the report at para 12 states decarbonisation from the electricity grid, could it be something at our sites, at Pendle Borough Council owned and controlled sites, that could be improved? For example, light sensors or more usage of light sensors. I appreciate there's a capital cost around any sort of improvements, but ultimately the long-term gain is the game that we're in. And no disrespect to the facilities managers of Pendle Borough Council sites, but some of the, looking around at some of the lighting is clearly dated. There may well be much more economically and more efficient technology that we could start looking at in the future, and if there's funding out there that we should probably be utilising to try and achieve, as Councillor Stone has pointed out, the ultimate target. That being said, para 18 of the observations section, page 3 of the report, mentions how at the moment we haven't seen the outcome of the council's fleet fuel pilot, which I was also interested to see because I was on the climate emergency working group when we made that decision to also take on board the new fuel alternative. Are there any early indications, however? Because I remember, if I'm not mistaken, Councillor Nadeem Ahmed did point out at a previous meeting how the initial figures were suggesting an improved sort of performance. Chairman have any assistance on those figures? And I know there might not be finer bullet points on that, but do we have any early indications?
Well, the estimation
So,
is that it should be emissions lowered between 80 to 90%.
Wow.
So it is quite at a you know, without going for electric vehicles, it is a good step there, because obviously we can't necessarily, I'm sure that we have rationalised our rounds of our bin wagons, we're not driving unnecessarily, we can't stop going to all the houses to pick things up, so those journeys can't be stopped. But I went to a conference last week it was held by the East Lancashire Chamber, and it was about the road to net zero, and I made a lot of contacts of the kinds of companies and grant bodies that will come and look at just exactly what you say. They will look at, we have already solar panel enabled our buildings, but they will look at the grants that you can get for doing things and help our thought leadership. And I have spoken to our officer Jill Dixon about this, and also I met there's a new course at Nelson and Cone College which is really about very much Pendle focused challenges that we face, you know, solid wall houses, rural lanes. There are things that we face here that other places, say where I come from on the Fylde coast, they don't face those challenges. So I have started sort of investigating whether perhaps as part of this course that they've developed, they could potentially look towards helping to train us, not on us as councillors and us as officers, not on the broader issues, the sort of BBC documentary about global climate change, but on the here, the now of this locality and the challenges we face and the options that we have open to us, so that we can provide thought leadership to our businesses and to our residents at a time which is really worrying for us all in terms of energy prices and cost of living.
Councillor Tom Webb.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just touching on a couple of points, really. The council has definitely had some opportunities in the recent months to take action that have slipped us by. I think the ground source heating at leisure centres was one of them. Ground source heating is wildly efficient, and though it is expensive, it does pay for itself in time, although it is a long time. And again, air source heating at Earby, it's a lot of money, but over time these things are paying off, and we can't just think about the monetary costs. Those homes built in Earby are all going to have gas boilers, and Councillor Sarah Colin Price is talking about retrofitting. Well, we could have fit in advance the solution, and now instead it's going to create a greater cost down the line to retrofit those buildings for a future solution that we definitely already have now. I think as well, rubbish collection, wheelie bins. There are solutions on the continent that don't require you to go to every house for bins with a bin wagon. You can have communal street bins, which would reduce the drive time of the fleet. And I think we need to be looking at these out of the box ideas, and we're not quite doing that yet. We're just looking at the figures and wondering what can we do with what we have, and we need to be looking at, you know, what we can do with things we don't have but could get. And I just don't think we have the imagination at the moment to be getting there, because the current trajectory, we're not going to get there for 2030. It's a pipe dream.
Thank you, Councillor. Apologies I didn't see you because you're hidden behind the camera. Right.
Chairman, can I just pick up one or two points? Councillor Stone said, you know, like I keep talking about decarbonisation. but there's a cost to that. I would reply to that by saying, well, the cost of not doing something is even greater. And in terms of climate change, we are seeing the consequences of climate change now and the costs that is making, both in terms of lives and livelihoods. So tomorrow we find out what the domestic energy cap will rise to, and the predictions are that the domestic cost will rise threefold over where we were a year ago. For councils, for businesses, we're already having to pay the real life costs of the energy. But I mean, it's a much bigger debate, and Councillor Tomwick alluded to this, and you know, we ought to be engaging in this discussion and this debate, and perhaps we're failing to do so. But we've got opportunities to encourage active travel, in other words, less vehicle use that we're missing. In terms of bin wagons, which is an issue that we've been touching on here, it's a much broader issue. I mean, Councillor Tomwick refers to the communal bins initiative, which, interestingly, the new Yorkshire Authority is looking at, and so new developments would require communal bins rather than individual bins for each property. But taking that one step back, the whole reduction, reuse, before we get to recycling is key, because if we could halve the amount of waste that was coming out of people's houses, then we would reduce the time, the effort and the energy to collect it all and then dispose of it further down the line.
With all due respect, Councillor, we're not going to solve that here tonight.
No, I understand that, but
right.
We really do need to be discussing it, because, you know, we've got a report, and being charitable, Councillor Stoll said it was passive, and you know, we really need to be a lot more active. And I started off in the first contribution by saying, look, you know, we could have taken action. We've made decisions in the last 2 years, last 12 months, that have not been to put the investment into reducing energy consumption. We've decided to go for the easy options, the ostensibly cheaper options, which are going to cost us dear in the future. And given the energy costs that we're going to suffer this winter, a lot of those costs are going to bite us in the backside in the next few months.
Right. Can we move this through then? Okay, no one further? Right, so the annual emissions report is duly noted. Number 8, I think I'm going to let David Coburn-Price come in up first with this, and then we'll go to the other side of the table.
Thank you, Ben. I think it's obviously it's the next stage in the compulsory purchase order. So I think all the recommendations are sound. Let's put it through. Let's push it into the next stage and get this thing moving. I think the only sort of questions I had, looking at the implications and the financial risk, we're obviously looking at the idea of gap funding and then the council being able to pass it on to the joint venture. Although I was a bit confused by coming back to paragraph 4, the top of page 3, where we're acquiring it and clearing it. So is it the understanding that Pendle Council is responsible for clearing it, or do we acquire it, then dispose of it to the Pembroke joint venture, and they get on with the building works? Is that a question I can ask?
Would you like to answer that one?
Yeah. That's something that we're still looking at. There's a range of options, like I say, when we can either buy it in with the funding, clear to sell it on, which in terms of things like subsidy control, which is the new term for the state aid, means that we don't have a problem with that and it's easy to do. but there are the issues of things like holding costs, how long it will take to relocate existing tenants in there.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the moment at the pros and cons, so we haven't got a definite way forward. That's not holding anything back, that is just being considered as we go through, and I think we need to just make sure that, you know, we're not causing problems for the council in terms of any revenue commitments until we sort of fully understand which is going to be the best option.
Right, okay. Yeah, so in that case, as you say, there's a series of options. We've got the legal process to go through of actually doing this CPO, and then we've got to make sure that we have an eye on what our options are to be able to obviously minimise the exposure to the council and also push forward on the Nelson Town deal to get this site renovated and deliver all the promises in paragraph 9, which sounds like a sort of an idyll of a town centre there with strong retail, appealing food and vital social interactions, which all sounds very positive. So I'll move the recommendation.
Okay. Comments, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I will second the recommendation as well, there are a number of points I'd like to seek some clarification on. This is, in my view, a historic item on this agenda, considering the years and years of decline of Pendle Rise and the plight that it's had on Nelson's High Street. And hopefully this is the first piece in the jigsaw to try and turn the corner in bringing back real life to the High Street in Nelson. You know, from myself being born and bred in Nelson, I was a local newspaper boy. I used to collect newspapers from one of the news agents around the corner from Pendle Rise, and having to see the years and years of decline, it truly has been heartbreaking. And at every meeting of the town council, we have a number of visitors from the town who come to discuss the state of Pendle Rise, and hopefully, like I mentioned, this is the first piece in the jigsaw. However, this is of course just our side of the case. There's also going to be another side of this case presented by the owners of Pendle Rise, who no doubt, in my view, will probably defend will defend this process. With my other hat on, with my day job, I think they will no doubt throw whatever they can at it, and it's absolutely essential for us to be at the top of our game, which I'm sure we are with yourself. I think for me, however, there's a couple of points here at 1.6, paragraph 1.6, that I wanted to seek some views on. I'm also conscious, Chairman, that obviously we are recording this, and it might be, you know, there might be some commercially sensitive points that I might go into. I don't know, can I take a proposal, Chairman, through you, that we switch off the recording and maybe exclude the press and public at this point in time? Because I don't want to go into the points and then for you to decide that, yeah, in fact it is commercially sensitive, because then it defeats the objective in the first place.
Well, it's a bit difficult to answer that because I don't know
exactly
to what extent it's going to be commercially sensitive. The view was taken that this could be taken in public.
It might be,
and I
it
think
could
it
be,
should
yeah.
stay with that.
Yes.
Okay. Carry on.
Okay. Paragraph 1.6, you know, is our sort of case in terms of why this CPO should go ahead. And my summary of paragraph 1.6 is essentially that the facilities have become dated, and obviously the level of occupancy are of concern. Is that enough? Should there be a more profound case presented? Again, I'm not teaching anybody how to do the job, I'm just asking the question. You know, clearly there's a lot more to the background around our relationship with the owners of Pendle Rise, which we haven't just stumbled across this stage where, or this point in time where we're having to go down a CPO. We have attempted a number of sort of other avenues with the current owners, and obviously they've not entertained us on that. Should we be making mention of or going into some sort of detail around the practically impossible sort of you know, outcomes of some of the other avenues, and of course some of the history around the legal battles that this council has had with the current owners, in particular around the, if I'm not mistaken, unpaid rates, which I know because of the different management companies that were set up with the current owners, there was a wriggling round from a legal angle of you know, of trying to avoid these things. Isn't this the sort of stuff that we should probably also be mentioning in terms of the problems that this council will continue to have? Because naturally, from the other side of the fence, you know, the response could be, well, we could do some of this improvement, or give us the money and we'll go ahead and carry out this, you know, sort of new facelift, so to speak. So I just want to, again, ask the officers to probably be mindful that when I read it, it didn't seem profound enough, and we probably just need to add some more detail. Again, I'm not here to, you're the experts.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the statement of reasons has been drawn up by a legal consultant who we've used on the previous CPOs, so he's very sort of clued up on the sort of things that you need to put in. But we've also employed a barrister who has worked with us on a number of planning issues and also on previous CPOs. He's looking through the statement of reasons at the moment. That's why we're asking for approval for it as a draft,
Okay.
because there will be some additional changes.
Right.
We did meet with the barrister earlier this week,
Yeah.
and he has suggested some additional information that he thinks we could put in, that we were just being a bit cautious about whether it was appropriate, along the lines of what you're saying. Obviously, I don't want to go into too much detail. This will be recorded, but yeah, I think there are still things that we can add to this to support the case, but it's a document that we will keep revising up until the time that we make the order. We have to have it as a final document.
Fair enough. And through you, Chairman, just a couple more points. If we're looking at the plan on page 5, so obviously the outline plan is the sort of site as we know it. However, there is also the bridge. I think it's got FB written on it. Footbridge, FB.
An old one.
I believe it is an old one. However, clearly, you know, I'm just thinking of this from a pragmatic and practical sense. Does it stop the current owners, because we're not including that in our CPO, so does it stop the current owners erecting a footbridge?
That was the old footbridge that was removed some time
It was
ago.
removed, but
Yeah.
clearly it's still in the plan, as in it existed, therefore it had some sort of airspace over that area, and therefore there must have been some sort of legal ownership of that area.
Yeah, the plan has been drawn up by legal looking at what is the official ownership, so that bridge didn't go over land that was owned by the shopping centre owner. There must have been some agreement at some stage for it to go over the highway, but the highway is still an adopted highway and is not part of this. Legal have checked to make
Okay.
sure that we've got all the ownerships within this, so there shouldn't be a problem there with being able
Hopefully
to
not.
put a bridge back.
We don't want an overnight bridge sort of being erected into, you know, council-owned premises in the future. So that's the reason why I raised that point. But I'll go back to my opening remarks. You know, this is, in my view, a historic part of this journey, and hopefully it's a successful outcome for this part of the journey. I read somewhere that, you know, we've got till 2026 to obviously, you know, activate and implement all of these projects. No doubt there's going to be challenges going forward. I've seen some of the plans, obviously as a member, being a member of the Town Deal Board, I've seen some of the plans, Chairman, for the, you know, the future look at this, and hopefully, you know, there will be a new lease of life to Nelson's High Street. So I'm happy to second the proposal, Chairman.
Excellent.
Chairman.
Councillor David Britt.
Thank you. Yes, I live in hope. I can't remember how many iterations of the rejuvenation of Nelson that, as a councillor, I've lived through. But I go back to the days when the M65 opened, and I think probably Ken McClave was leader of the Labour group at the time, and responsible for its then pedestrianisation, which I think was a significant mistake. And since then, you know, we've had different palettes of materials used, you know, with high quality stone in the most recent iteration. But I think for people across Pendle, they see money being thrown at Nelson, and none of that investment actually making that transformational change that it requires. In terms of what was the Arndale Centre, I think most people across Pendle will agree that the best thing for it is for it to be flattened, and its redevelopment is something that needs to be done. I don't think the current owners are in any position whatsoever to do that. I'm not going to go into the different aspects of the ownership and the intricacies of the management company and the ownership thereof. But recent years have shown that there's been a certain amount of ducking and diving in order to achieve financial outcomes that may not have been in the public interest. In terms of the discussions, my understanding is that this is a twin-track approach, that there are discussions with the owners as well as a compulsory purchase in the offing. So it may be that there is a meeting of minds and that it can be acquired by negotiation. Who knows? What I really want to talk about is the redevelopment, because within here there is the reference to a single story, essentially single story, commercial development. And I hark back to a previous proposal that we had, which was to use any redevelopment as an opportunity for introducing residential use. And most recently, I flagged this up at the joint venture company and said, well, look, would it not make sense for us to look at residential accommodation on first and upper floors, rather than just having a purely commercial venture. The thinking previously was that the general decline of retail, I'm not specifically referring to Nelson, but bricks and mortar retail is in long-term decline, and the prospect of Nelson bucking the trend and all of a sudden becoming successful with bricks and mortar is remote. And given that that's the case, then we really should be looking at further uses that bring life into the middle of Nelson and bring good uses into the middle of Nelson. And in terms of sustainability, it makes sense to have developments which do have that accommodation on the upper floors. Now, the experts dismissed that and said, well, no, it doesn't stack up. But I think that it should be something that we should be considering. And I think, to my mind, that option, even if it only may be an option, should be included in the rubric, so that we're not just saying, right, this is a commercial redevelopment. It could be a mixed use redevelopment which brings in new or alternative uses that make Nelson a more vibrant centre. So that would be my plea, and I think that would serve a lot of purposes, and the opportunity for a greater successful redevelopment, rather than the fourth time that we've tried to do something in Nelson that's made that big difference. And I say fourth time, and it might be the fifth or the sixth, but in my lifetime I've seen several changes. I'm looking at one across the road where we thought that number 1 Market Street would be something that would help the regeneration, bring administrative work into the town and create the condition for a more vibrant town centre. I have to say that's only worked to a very limited extent, but with the streetscape and all the the different ways in which the highways have been changed, there's never been anything that's been the magic bullet. I hope that this is a magic bullet. as I started, I live in Hope.
Well, thank you, Councillor. The first starting point is the compulsory purchase. Martin, do you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo Councillor Ali's very well-made points, and indeed some elements of Councillor Whip's. This is a very welcome development for Nelson, a cornerstone of Nelson's potential revitalisation. My only question is relating to, on the implications section on page 4, where we note that after acquisition there's a risk that the council will obviously bear any costs of the centre running to loss. I just wondered if we could perhaps have some idea of the maximum sort of timescales that we're talking about there in terms of that potential exposure lasting.
Yeah, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so, I think as a sort of Councillor Coburn Price, I think that's something we're still looking at, the pros and cons of the different delivery options, and we are very clear that, you know, we want to minimise the revenue implications on the council, so there is scope for a sort of a back-to-back arrangement, or whether we get the joint venture to do the management of the centre whilst we own it. So we haven't got the answers yet. I think part of the difficulty is we've had a lot of problems getting information we required to enable us to negotiate the acquisition and fully understand the costs within the centre, and that's causing us some problems as well in terms of being able to understand, you know, sort of how well the centre's running at the moment and if it's running at a profit or a loss. So we're still trying to pull that information together through a legal process of requiring information to come through, but until we get that information it's quite difficult really to fully cost this. So it's not ideal, but we are still pushing it forward.
Okay. So, well, the retailing wheel continues to turn. We've seen a lot of massive changes in that area, but one thing's been fairly constant. For some 6,000 years, marketplaces are still operating. That's when it started, and that's where they're still there. The difference is, of course, you can have a digital marketplace now. But there we go. Look, can we agree on this? The recommendations on right the way through 1, 2, 3 and 4 to progress and go forward, please. Thank you very much. Disabled facilities policy. David Coburn Price, do you want to?
Chairman. Yeah, I think with this one, we've talked about the DFG before and the fact that there is this big built-up amount of slippage that needs to be pushed along. I think obviously what this does is it starts to say, here is the policy, let's get this issued. Just to show I've read it, by the way, if you look at the contents page, you see there are 2 number 31s. And that flows through into the actual main document as well. So there you go, there's a big one for you. I think in terms of the way the paper structured, obviously a lot of guidance for people. I suppose whether it's almost like too complicated or too intimidating for people to fill in on process, it's possible. I'm sure when people fill it in, they'll probably get help from appropriate bodies to guide them through it, and I'm sure Pendle Council itself does it. And obviously we get an admin fee for all the various admin processing, initial application, etc. Putting a charge on properties as well is another one. Dispute resolutions, I see we sort of get involved in as well, just to make sure that the actual customer and the contractor can agree on what the solution is, and then obviously inspecting, signing off, etc. So I think the paper hangs together. The policy is very detailed and good and supportive. So as I say, I hope we can get messages out there that it's a nice, easy thing to do. People should get on and do it. We've got the funds available. And we want to see our capital pots used to good effect. So I would support the recommendation that's put on the table there.
Councillor Tom Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I think the sort of core reason why this is a lot of slippage is it's just too complicated to get at. My time on the Health Scrutiny Committee looked at pots like this and feedback from the people who were sort of talking about it was just too hard to get, too much bureaucracy. I think anything that would make these easier to get is just a positive, really. And that's the key thing. We don't want to put too many barriers in place. And I know the sort of thinking is, you know, we need to make sure that it's going to the people who need it most. But I mean, if we've got a lot of slippage there, maybe it's okay to make a couple of mistakes. And obviously, if they are applying, there is some need there. I just think we need to make it easier on people who are already in a difficult situation and don't want the added difficulty of going through a bureaucratic process.
Stress and so on. Thanks, Councillor. Any Councillor Mahmood?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Generally speaking, we welcome the report. But I do have reservations that regarding the increasing fees. Considering that, you know, the cost of living at the moment, whether that's food prices or fuel prices and other things, all going up, including building materials. And I think it would be highly unfair at this stage to increase these fees. And looking at on page 2, the second point, I would say that we stay status quo regarding the you know, when contracts are signed and the works are done, because I think this will create more headache for unfairness to the residents and the customers. So I would recommend that, you know, the fees wise we stay as we are, and then the second item on page 2 is the status quo.
So that's a formal proposal, yeah?
Proposal, yeah.
I'll second that, Chairman.
Seconded on that. Sorry.
Sorry, could I just come in and sort of respond to Councillor Moose? But in terms of the fees, I mean, there's very few people actually pay those. It ends up coming out the grant, because when we do the means testing, there's not that many people that have a contribution. So the fee element is just in effect sort of a way that it pays for our staff out of the grant, rather than it being that many people having to pay. But I mean, whatever fee structure you have, it's always going to be, you know, sort of advantaging or disadvantaging some people. The way that the officers have done this is trying to do it so it sort of reflects the time and doing different percentages for different sizes of jobs, because I think the problem is some of the smaller ones actually take a lot of time and are not, and so we're trying to do this as much as possible as a sort of a cost recovery. But yeah, fees is never an easy one.
No.
In terms of the second point about our relationship in terms of the grant and how we do it, we've had long discussions with legal about that. It's something that they've picked up on the way that we've handled it, where in effect they're saying that, you know, we are having the contract with the contractor, and we shouldn't be doing that because it's not our property. And the legal advice is it can be very difficult for us if something goes wrong. So what we should do is make sure the contract is between the contractor and the applicant, and we are supporting that process and can do the tendering for them and that sort of thing. So it's the nuance of really sort of the legal position we've been putting ourselves in with the way we've been doing it so far, and it's just something that legal have now expressed concerns about and advising to do it this way. And we've looked at the way a number of other authorities do it, and they do it in this new way to make sure that sort of they're not sort of at legal risk if anything does go wrong.
I mean, contract-wise, yeah, I don't think there's an issue, but you know, we're charging these customers, say like 10%, say it's like 30,000 allocation, 10% fee. You're charging £3,000, but strictly speaking, we're not doing any. Well, I'm assuming there's not much work that's going into that.
To be honest, there's actually often more work with the ones that we don't control.
Right.
Where we control and we sort of say, well, we'll use our contractors, we'll go and we'll check on the works. But sometimes people say, well, I prefer to use my own, and then you know, they have problems getting the quotations in the right format, and you're going back and two, and then sometimes they do the work and then the the applicant's not happy with the quality of the work, and so we can end up having to go at a later stage to deal with it than perhaps we would have done if we were having an agency. So it's we prefer people to use what we were calling an agency, we're now calling a sort of a what we call a facilitator role, because actually it's better support to them, but we realise not everybody wants to go down that way, and it's
There's still got option to go externally if they want to treat.
yeah, they have that option, and that's what we're calling on this the non-facilitator, that there is still a fee because we have to go through, we do the means testing, we talk them through the forms, we draw up the schedule of works for them to do, and then they go out to their contractors on it. We don't have quite as much supervision on site, but there is still, like I say, as much, if not more, work at times when we don't manage the process.
Councillor David Witt first, and then Councillor Aneve.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, I disagree with Asjad on this. As I see it, the problem is the processing of grant applications, and the bottom line with that is the staff that we've got to be able to do it, and we need to have sufficient staff in place in order to be able to go through the grants and ensure that the work is carried out and the grants are paid out. So it's absolutely critical that we've got the funding to pay the people to do the processing, and in effect this is where the funding comes from, to pay those people. And they're into Magic Money Tree that is going to have a separate pot of money in order to pay to the people to process the grants. So I mean, I think it's an integral part of getting the grants through the door, out of the door, to have the money in place, and the money comes from the fees that are charged. So I think in this case that the proposals in the report are sensible and we should accept.
Okay, Councillor Aneve.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add on, obviously we talk about the 10%ing. I mean, my understanding, if you don't mind me asking, is that the current moment is, if a grant is awarded, either the customer is given the full process and they can manage it, or officers manage it and they tender and they manage all the changes, things like this. Now, with the new change, you from 10% to 15%, my understanding is that you'll tender and then you'll pass on all the responsibility to the to the house for them to manage.
No,
now, go on.
It's the way the contract actually works. So the contract at the moment, we contract with the contractor to do the work, but the contract would be between the contractor and the applicant. So it's just it's who the contracting parties are in this new arrangement. So we will still provide the same level of support, but it's the issue about us protecting ourselves contractually.
But what we in theory are doing, we're passing all the work onto the household. Okay, and I've spoken to a few of the local authorities. Okay, they're doing still the old way. So I can't understand why the increase from 10% to 50% is happening. If we're going to pass a bulk of the work to the house owner, why are we increasing the fees? So it just causes concern for myself. The other one, Chair, is obviously we got a £30,000 cap on. Okay, and buildings and materials over the last 6 months, 12 months, have got up to maybe 40%. Okay, so if we're increasing the fees and we're taking money from 30,000, we're giving less, increasing costs. So the actual money the person gets is going to be much less. So one of the suggestions could be that let's take the cap off. Let's look at, because we're only giving money to people who actually need it, and we have processes and we have reports by professionals who come and say, this is what somebody needs, and this is how much it will cost. And I don't think anybody will say 70,000, 80,000, it's probably 30, 35, 40,000, or whatever that is. So because of the increase in costs, everything else, and we're increasing the officer costs, why we still got a cap on? So in the reality is that if we don't do nothing, the money that is allocated to the work is going to go down, and half of the work wouldn't be able to be done because the cost of materials has gone up, offices cost has gone up. So in reality, the household is going to be a loser, and most of them may not be able to afford doing any of the work. So the total process then is a waste of time and should be happening. So if we're going to go along and agree with Tom that the process, to be honest, in Pendle is very difficult. I remember I managed one of these things for 1 year, and I tell you, I found it difficult. I come from a business background, and I tell you, this is so difficult. And I can't understand why it is, because we just create processes for the sake of processes, And we should be able to simplify this. And a lot of the residents who I deal with, who talk to me, are really, even when they got the grant, it's so difficult. So, 3 things, Chair, is one, take the cap off of 30,000, increase it to something. In reality, because of the building, I mean, of all the things, I was reading something in the Guardian, I can't remember, on Facebook. I think it said from 38% to 45% building material has gone up in the last 9 months. And it's going to go further up. Okay? So if we still got a cap on, okay, what really, in reality, is the household be able to build? Okay? So let's be realistic. If you're going to do all this, let's be realistic. And the other one is, obviously, again, we're doing this. So 3 things. The 15% going up, I think at this time, in principle, I agree with it, but now with the cost of living and everything else, I think maybe we should stick to this at the moment and look at it again in 6-12 months' time, okay? Because obviously, with everything going up, and we'll be discussing whatever, I think it's important that we produce something, and if we're going to make new policies, which is reality is going to benefit the most vulnerable people here we're talking about. We're not talking about me and you. We're not talking about us. We're talking about vulnerable, disabled people here who really need this. Okay? Cut the process. Sometimes it's taking years for them to get a grant. Other councils in the localities, really a third of the time. Sometimes it's 20%, it's 80% quicker. So I'm just sometimes baffles me that why Pendle Council takes such a long time. I've never understood that, because whenever we discuss it, we just cut corners and just move on as councillors. And again, like the climate change discussion, maybe this is a discussion we need to have as an open and honest discussion at another time to see what happens. But here, sir, for this paper, in particular the 30,000 cap chair, we need to be honest and realistic. The people who are going to be suffering are the disabled. The cost of living has gone up, the cost of price has gone up, and that's something I think we should increase.
Please.
Yeah. The 30,000 is the mandatory level, so that is what government set. We do have, and we've had for some time now, a discretionary additional 10,000, because we recognise that particularly people needing an extension is starting above the 30,000. So that's been in place for a while and still within this policy. The officer who looked at this policy went and spoke to a lot of other local authorities in the area and has adapted this policy sort of based on others as well and sort of good practice. And yes, it is. It's quite a complicated process. It's not helped because we're in a 2-tier authority, so it has to go through Lancashire County Councils, occupational therapists first, and then it comes through to us as a referral, and then if we've got any questions we have to go back to them, and that can slow the process. At the moment there's a backlog where we think suddenly we'll get a big rush of cases and then we might not get any more for some time because of their staffing resources, so it makes it more difficult here because of that process. In terms of trying to speed things up and support, the officers do spend a lot of time with people going through and supporting on the process. Unfortunately, a lot of it is, it's mandatory requirements about how we do things and the way we do it. Wherever we can, we look at the processes, the systems we use to try and speed things up, to make it easier for people. But unfortunately, there's always the balance between making it easy and making sure we have a robust process with public money. And it's the same with the discretionary 10,000. You know, in some cases it's difficult to get an extension for 40,000, but if we increase the discretionary, of course it takes more out of the budget, so it means there's less grants we can do overall. So again, it's a balance. And the reason that it takes so much longer here is because of the amount of funding we get, which is, you know, as a lot of members know, is historic and has been a problem for us for years, where we get about half the funding that Burnley gets when we have very similar demographics. Other authorities on the Fylde coast have no waiting list and they're scratching around trying to work out how to spend the money, and some of the things are probably not anything like DFGs, but just general support around the house, and because they have so much money they don't really know what to do with it or can't spend it. So it has been a problem for years, that allocation, but we're always just trying to balance the sort of, you know, trying to speed things up and support people, but also, you know, get through the numbers that we've got.
Thanks for that. I think we're in the art of the possible, really. You've got your answer there. It's 30,000 plus 10, possibly. So you know, there is no way we can finance any more than that. It's government money that we redistribute. Hopefully, with this in place, it will speed up, but we need to be able to have the people to do it. So it's, you know, it is what it is. So we've got a proposal at the moment that we don't increase it. Is that right? Is that what you want to stay with? I don't think the cap is possible to change that, doable. So is it you've already got a seconder for that. So any other proposals? Do we go straight to this and then see what happens after that?
It's an amendment to not to increase.
Yes.
The fees.
Okay.
The fee on the status quo with the contractual.
Right. Well, I think she'll take them as two separate.
Yeah. Right. So not to first of all then an amendment not to increase the fees. So that's a proposal. We've got a seconder. All those in favour of that? Okay. All those against that? Okay. So that's that one down. The other one is to stay status quo on the contract. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And you've got a seconder for that?
Myself, yeah.
Okay. So, all in favour of that amendment? All those against? We're back to,
The original motion, which is to agree that
as David Coleman Price got a seconder for your proposal.
I'll second it.
Right. Moving on. So, all those in favour of that? Okay. All those against? Right. Carried. Thank you very much for that one. Right, we're on to number 10, are we? On this one.
no, okay.
Number 10 it is. Councillor David Whitt, do you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. Could I propose that we go with the £18,000 offer for the land for its use as a surface development car park, and on the basis of the 125-year lease. Chairman, this is a plot of land which has remained undeveloped on the Cronest industrial estate since the rest of the land was developed. When the area was first opened up for industrial commercial development, we introduced buffers around the different land. If you look at the plan on the attached to the report, you'll see that there's an area of land between the houses and the outlined area, which also extends towards Edward Street. Now, that remains as a buffer zone, but without going into fantastic detail, this area has a history of flooding, and I've been there when properties in that area, domestic properties, have flooded, and I've personally witnessed the whole of this area of land underwater together with the adjacent road, and over a period of years we've done different things that have alleviated the flood risk to some extent, including getting a larger culvert which runs through to Skipton Road. But one of the things that we did is at the back of Edward Street, we built a mound which actually retains the water and stops it from going into people's houses. And the impact of that is that if the culvert is unable to take the flow of water, or it gets blocked or something like that, then the water spills onto the adjacent land, and this site that's up for disposal, together with the land at the back of Edward Street and the back of Roundel Road, and part of the buffer zone that I referred to earlier on, is as a sort of like a reservoir for the flood water, so it attenuates the water and stops it from going into people's houses. So I've said all along that I can't see how this could be sensibly developed with buildings, because it's a flood alleviation scheme. It forms part of a storage area for flood water. If it's used for car parking, clearly, that's not going to affect levels to any great degree. And if a car park floods, so long as we get all the vehicles off it, there's no great harm done. But any buildings built on there would result in those properties either getting flooded or flooding of other properties, because the land could not be used for that flood alleviation. So for that reason, I think that we accept the lower offer for the car park use, and we accept that the £6,000 difference is fine, because otherwise we're just getting ourselves into a heck of a mess. So I move we accept the £18,000.
Just a question.
Sarah Coleman-Cross.
Given the parlous flooding situation, should we be sort of trying to specify as a condition that there is a permeable surface to the car park?
Generally, it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference.
No?
It's not, the water doesn't disappear into the ground. The water has to flow off the land. So whether it's a permeable or impermeable surface, it's immaterial. The water comes off the watercourse and spreads out over the land.
Yes, we're back to this level. David?
I second let's get on with it and dispose of it. 18,000, 125-year lease. It's a long-running saga. Let's put it to bed and get on with it.
All those in favour? Thank you. Jim Bill. Well, I'm going to go to let Sarah kick off with this one, series.
Two of us are on the working group, Mr. Aslan and I, but it's a really inclusive, three of us are on the working group, and we had a lovely walk up, didn't we, in beautiful sunshine, and we saw the special northern orchids and butterflies and so forth, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was a really productive meeting, because in the room we captured people who have been there before, Alkington Woodland, and have a great deal of expertise of running a local nature reserve to bring to us, and they're happy to help us. we've got local residents like Alison Plackett, who have phenomenal levels of local knowledge, and then we have subject matter expert John Lamb of the Lancashire Wildlife Trust, who's offered to hold our hand through this process. And he explained to us that for it to be designated formally as a local nature reserve, then what we need to do is have the ownership by Pendle Council, but the management by a separately constituted body, separate from the council, and they can then apply for grants. And at the first meeting, as well as making that decision and saying that we can move on with the formal designation, we listened to a plea from John Lamb, who said that for a dozen years or so there hadn't been any haymaking on Gibb Hill, and as a result we haven't been able to dissipate the seeds from the wildflowers. So he urged us to get on with the haymaking, and I was anxious that people might misconstrue this because it's particularly important in the biological heritage areas. So we issued a press release to explain the thinking and to prove that we had expert advice. But obviously this is just another staging post in the final goal, which will see Gibb Hill designated as a local nature reserve. And rather amazingly, this designation will double at a stroke the amount of nature reserve within Pendle, which is not well provided for in its residents. And it sits really beautifully between Combe and Nelson, serving both populations. So it's actually ecologically valuable, but from an amenity perspective, it's so valuable. And at the meeting that we had, and I think as Jan is going to discuss this, we were talking about involving the community in the schools who exactly abut the hill. So it's actually, I'm really, really excited. I don't know whether that's showing, but I think that this is wonderful to move this over to the next level. I propose that we follow these recommendations.
Councillor Mahmood?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, happy second the proposal that we designate Gibb Hill as a nature reserve. There was a detailed discussion, we had a site visit, very productive. We had good input from different members of that particular group. With this green space will create, bring back and create more natural habitat. From a mental health point of view, if people use it largely, I think it will improve their mental health. There's one or two points that I do differ with in the recommendations. Number 2, and to some extent number 3. I think what we ought to do, and I think what would be the proper way of doing it, would be to set up a committee of this council that manages this new nature reserve, one that is designated, rather than a working group. And so the council committee is politically balanced, and then that can invite different experts, from the local nature reserve, from the local friends groups, and that kind of thing. So I do differ on that, and very strongly differ on that this should not be handed over to a working group. I think it is a committee of the council that specifically manages and runs this new local nature reserve. I think that would be beneficial in the long run. I think it will safeguard its long-term future, and it will help to develop properly over the long term. As well as looking at it from a working group point of view, it could take the wrong turn, if you will, with different people getting involved and different organisations who have self-interest. So I think for those reasons, I think I would recommend that it's a committee of this council that manages and runs the nature reserve.
I think Mr. Roosdale will back me up here. The reason that it has to be a separate, not part of this council body, like it is Alkin Codes, it has to be a properly constituted body, they're a charity, is so that they can hoover up all the grants from Natural England and all the different things that are open to voluntary organisations to manage the nature reserve. So the land ownership remains with Pendle Council, but the day-to-day management and the financing is from this properly constituted body that the working group has not set up yet because it's only had one meeting.
Yeah, that's right, and that's been, as you say, that's happened at Alpine Courts, and I think it's the same as is the case at Ball Grove.
Yes. It
Yeah, I do strongly disagree with that. That there's that a separate entity within the council manages or runs the local nature reserve. And my understanding is, if it's a local nature reserve in the Fishbeck, then it's actually the council's responsibility how they manage and run, not a separate entity. Which, in my view, this is a separate, completely separate entity.
the issue you've got to bear in mind as well is that you close the door on an inordinate amount of funding. It just disappears, you will not be able to access it. And I think you can probably have safeguards in there anyway in terms of who's on that working group, but that's the downside of it. You've got no money. So all of a sudden you've got this beautiful place that it's going to cost money to maintain, given the route you're going down. And the only way is to set up a semi-arm's length organisation who can apply for grants, get money coming in and help and to do the job. Otherwise, we will have a problem finding finance to actually deliver it.
Yeah, Chairman, just on that, maybe more for clarity, again, I agree with Councillor Aschad's point of view. In fact, I recently was approached with regards to another nature reserve up at Quarry Hill, which, as you'll know, Chairman, is obviously controlled by Lancashire County Council. That hasn't stopped the County Council from continuing to be, obviously, the sort of safeguardians of that nature reserve, but still be able to seek funding. In fact, I was asked for supporting comments for the County Council, in fact, to obtain funding from a government stream. So I don't think, again, part of my ignorance, but I don't think it's the case that if we set up a committee here with Pendle Borough Council, that we will be debarred from applying for funding elsewhere. I don't think that's morally correct either. Just looking at it from a local governance perspective, this council itself, for various different projects, can still access funding. Yes. So I don't see why that we will become debarred as a result of that. And I've just given you an example, Chairman. In fact, to be factually correct, I just checked my emails, and that is the case. Lancashire County Council is accessing funding, from various different pots for Quarry Hill, for example. So why couldn't Pendle Council continue to do that with this nature reserve? So hence, I'll support Councillor Aschad's view that it should be, and it's only right, that it is not only a committee of this council, but also a politically balanced council. With respect, colleagues, I think we all are aware of the comments that have been made online. There are so many interested parties with this site. And I think by having a politically balanced committee, it'll ensure that the actual purpose of this nature reserve and the sort of the new life that we want this area to see will actually be achieved, Chairman. So again, I'll support Councillor Aschad's view, not only because it's a sensible approach, but also because I've just given you a real life example of where funding can still be accessed, Chairman.
Well, I'll take advice.
I'm no expert on applying for grants. I can't remember Pendle Council applying for any grants for any of its local nature reserves in the time that I've been here. And the example of Alkin Coast is that all the funding has come from the Friends group there, who they applied for it and applied the money there. It's just been a basic maintenance 1,000 a year from Pendle Council.
They have actually got hundreds of thousands of pounds from all kinds, not just central government, but benefactors, different people. They are highly motivated in pursuing their aims. They have programmes of breeding of different dragonflies. They have created different areas in Alkin Coats woodland. And that really, that sort of, we all know, I'm looking at Mr Gibson, he's trying to suppress a yawn, but he is not going to want to, if we come to him every year, to say we would like a large pot of money for this. He's saying, well, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this to spend on. In Cone, I know that this is partly in Nelson, we have 2 live examples that are very, very successful in driving forward not only the ecological ambition for their area, but also financially as well.
Sure. Just a question.
Councillor Nick.
Why can't all this be done with the committee? Because the county is doing it and they're going to apply to all sort of funds. Everything you've just said on here can still be done. We can still go for hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds. Okay? Alkin cost was set up how many years ago, Philip? And it's a very different thing. So different times, obviously, you can't compare them both. So you've got a live example happening now of county who is applying everywhere. So I can't see any losses in this. You know, everything what obviously Sarah said will happen, can happen. You know, everything which obviously Councillor Sarah is saying can happen. But but this is more strategic, you know, committee which obviously will benefit.
One thing I do know, you would certainly not be eligible for quite a large amount of grants that are available, because the starting point is they're not available to local authorities. You know, so they are targeted at not local authorities. So whichever way we go with this, you're going to restrict the opportunities that these NGOs have got, these volunteer areas that they can apply and get money for, that councils are restricted, can't do it. So there's that element. Councillor David Comer-Price.
Yeah, thank you. I think yeah, let's maximise the chance we have for available grants, rather than say let's keep ourselves to a smaller range. We've got to give ourselves the best chance to be able to fund this, and also with the most enthusiastic people. I think the last thing we need is another working group or committee made up of councillors with 4 council officers and council administrators who have to turn up to meetings, put the grants together for us. Let's let the enthusiasts do it. You know, there's a working group of enthusiasts. So I think let's take that route. It takes the politics out of it, just like the Alkin Coates one has. You've got enthusiasts, knowledgeable people who know what they're doing. You've got the stakes of the Nelson and Cone town councils, and you've also got the subject matter experts and the enthusiasts. And that's the best way to engage people for that for the future, not to have another council committee.
So we've got
Just one question.
sorry.
This is not political. I think the concern is, or the danger is, say like 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 50 years down the line, if it's a separate entity that's private, they can sell that piece of land.
No, they
They don't
can't.
own it.
Yeah.
They don't
Pendle
own it.
owns it.
The council does.
100% own it.
Yeah.
Pendle
Once
does.
it's declared as a nature reserve.
Yes.
Right.
At
Yeah.
that point, yeah.
Totally on it. So it can't be sold off and used for anything without the council.
And stuff, so
Yes.
that's the concern.
Okay.
Chairman, last point. Just on the point that Councillor David Comer-Price raised about the involvement of the town councils, I think it's also right that the town councils are involved. That being said, the recommendation at point 3 states that the approval be given to the working group to take on the role of the management, whereas paragraph 5 and on page number 2 states that the 2 town councils be involved in its management. So which one will it be?
Well,
I would think that they would send a representative to be on the
working group.
Already done it.
So
work.
you,
That's how it happens.
so that everybody would
Yeah.
everybody be represented
Yeah.
and be there. So we have we're running out of time here a bit. So we have an amendment to this proposal. Sorry, Cassie.
Well, Chairman, I mean, I think we're at risk of dancing on the head of a pin. I don't think there's much disagreement across the room about the designation. Now, I recollect that we've declared a number of local nature reserves in Pendle, Longmashire Marsh, Greenfield, Alton Courts, and some of those are quite long in the tooth now, and I perceive, and I'm not involved with any one of them, but I perceive from a distance that the real risk is after a period of 30 years or so, the people who were initially involved are no longer there, and there do become difficulties of the sustainability of the volunteer resource that actually makes things tick over. And I do know from speaking, listening to people involved with different nature reserves that that is an issue. So I think there needs to be a balance, that dancing on the head of the pin, between the longevity of a local council, Pendle or Colne Town Council or Nelson Town Council, and the input from volunteers. And I think that the composition of any entity that we have, whatever that is called, is crucial, so that there's a right balance between the two, and there is an input from a long-term body such as this council that gives it a sustainability over a longer period of time. So to my mind, I think that I take on board what is being said on both sides of the argument. I think let's get the designation sorted out. If there's further consideration needed for the constitution and the both in the sense of written constitution and constitution as to membership, then that is something that can be dealt with down the line and shouldn't be something that hinders the decision being taken at this point.
And that, in fact, will have to happen because it will need to be embodied in the management plan and maybe a management agreement with the working group. So, and they will come back to this committee in time before the final declaration is made.
So, can we agree in principle that we can move on with this?
In principle, I agree that it should be a nature reserve, or has to.
Well, I think
even though you're reassured on the ownership and the fact that they can't be abused.
I don't think there's more to come, obviously, clearly, as Philip...
Chairman, could the difficulty be resolved if in the second recommendation develop the draft declaration document, management plan, and then insert constitution of the body, so that we're actually addressing the fact that the constitution needs to be something that's sorted out.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm just inserting the word constitution.
Yeah.
So we were looking at the declaration, the management plan, and constitution.
Working with the working group.
Yes.
The constitution of the working group, which involve it, include its composition.
Who's on it, what, and where?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we agreed?
No,
You're not agreed?
Do me best.
Right, well then we will go to put your motion forward and second it, and let's get what's your motion now then?
What is it?
You just don't agree?
Committee of the,
Yeah, but the amendment is that there be a committee of
Committee,
the council
so-
rather than a working group.
Right, okay. All in favour of that? All against it? Right, so we now
Yeah, the original.
Original one
Well, Mr Chairman, for clarity,
With the
With-
changes?
with,
can I propose the inclusion of the word
yes, absolutely,
constitution
yes.
of the word?
I was going to,
Yeah.
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 I've written this in.
okay, all in favour of that? Good. 12. Levelling up parks fund notification of eligibility. Can we sort of note this? Is everybody happy with this? It seems to be.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. It is good news, however, there is a bit of detail in my view that probably needs to be added. Number one, the map at the back, I'm presuming it's an electronic map that you can zoom into so you can actually see the exact area that's being discussed, whilst the report at page 2, final paragraph, or just above implication, states that the identified region is Wimbley, Banking-Corn, Lonsdale Street in Nelson. I'm not sure Lonsdale Street in Nelson has any areas that actually can take or have any benefit from this, if I'm not mistaken. Netherfield Road, however, it makes sense, and again, Netherfield Road is, you've got the bugger at the bottom, you've got the play area to the top, so I would just need some clarification, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, in terms of what sites is the government suggesting that we...
Hasn't suggested that, sorry.
I know, but there's always an indication, so I just need to know the locality of that. Maybe we can work with the officers and the area committee.
Yeah, I don't think it is saying that there is anywhere suitable. It is saying that they're the poorest 3 areas in terms of green space.
That exists.
And you should be looking at them as being arguably the most deserving cases if
Yes.
there is something feasible.
Yeah, of course.
There may not be.
That's fine. And so then, in addition to that, through you, Chairman, I think it's important for the area committee to have some input, especially Nelson Bradford lead the area committee towards this proposal that needs to be submitted. And obviously the recommendation is that the environmental services manager will apply for the funding, but clearly there has to be a project proposal that needs to be submitted. So I think it's important there should be some input from the Nelson Bradford lead the area committee on that. Once we obviously identify the suitable location of where this regeneration can take place, because the letter from the Department for Levelling Up states that this funding is to be used for the creation or significant refurbishment of parks. So clearly there isn't a park on Netherfield Road. So the proposal. Yeah, well, there will be one. We have to obviously deal with the details, Chairman, of the proposal, and I think it's important that the area committee should have some input on that. So hopefully you can accept that as a friendly amendment, Chairman, to the recommendation.
Well, I think if it's going to Nelson, it should also go to Colne.
Yes,
One
fine.
of the
Yeah,
areas.
fine.
But bearing in mind the time scale that we've got on this.
I appreciate that, Philip. But I think I'm sure colleagues in Cornwall will act swiftly as well as those in Nelson in terms of working with the area with the manager.
I'm very interested to hear Councillor Whip's comments.
Well, Chairman, I agree that the respective area committee should be consulted, and given that Tatton Parish Council are responsible for play areas, that it would be sensible also to canvass the opinions of Colne and Nelson Town Councils. The timescale as set out is that there's a project proposal needs to be submitted by the 3rd of October. Given those timescales, it would be possible for both town councils and area committees to look at this, to come forward with suggestions in terms of making a decision on what proposal or proposals are put forward. Could I suggest that the next meeting of this committee considers the submission that's to be put in? And I speak as someone that isn't in, doesn't represent one of the priority areas, and I dare say that other parts of Pendle could well look at this as an opportunity which we're not able to take part in. But I think that's a sensible thing to do, and you know, 85 grand in the scheme of things
It's not.
into a lot of money,
No.
but it needs to be done equitably and it needs to be done in such a way as to benefit those areas that have been highlighted as most in need.
Okay. Final comment,
I think
Councillor.
just pulling together, I think, yes,
Coleman Price.
let's ask the area committees for some input. There are clear guidelines in terms of the sorts of levels of green cover, levels of deprivation, etc., that the area has to focus on. That's where the government's money is targeted. It's not a huge amount, you're right. If we start to do 2, 3, 4 different places, you're into almost peanuts, really. But I think, yes, some clear guidance from the area, clear guidance to the area committees, and then clear feedback from them. Because obviously time is of the essence, given that it's the 3rd of October deadline, and presumably we want to see a little final proposal coming to next P&R, perhaps. So yeah, I think clear guidance, clear timetable, and so we can modify the recommendations accordingly.
Good.
And I'm suggesting town council
Yes,
as well.
yes.
Yeah.
Got that in there as the final as a.
Don't look stressed,
Hey?
you're not here.
You thought we were going to get away
You're
scot-free.
going in tomorrow.
Right, councillors, we're now on the
That's one.
Thir-
Second to last.
13. I've lost. We go to 13A now. I haven't got a paper on this.
Not any papers on 13A. Is anybody else?
No, it's in the it's on the
Straightforward
pink slip.
recommendation, I think.
Okay, it's a referral.
Right.
Chairman, I think Councillor Tomwick wants to
Yeah,
come in
his
on
hand
this for
up.
a start.
I don't have agenda, so I don't actually know
Oh,
what
sorry.
item
Oh,
we're on.
EV chargers.
Yeah,
EV chargers, right? Yes.
Um,
Okay.
At Wellhouse Road car park.
Yeah. Very much like to come in on that, Chair. Thank you for enlightening me on what item we're on. Yeah. So this is something that I sort of started. I found it on Twitter actually. So Instavolt is the biggest sort of network in the UK, or one of, and they were looking to roll out a network of chargers called destination chargers, and the requirements for that are quite strict. They're looking for sites that are close to town centres, have amenities such as public toilets, and the rest. And so I was looking in West Craven for different sites and proposing them, and this was the only one that stuck to the person I was talking to at Instavolt. And so I felt it was quite important that we try and got this through, because this is the kind of thing that the tendering process we're having across the borough wouldn't really pick up on, because it's not something that's applicable to the entire borough. It is a destination charger. It's one of a kind in Pendle, in that public toilets have been closed down across the way, and so therefore it's an opportunity which I wanted to grasp with both hands, really.
Okay. Councillor David Webb.
Thank you, Chairman. The suggestion was raised by Councillor Tomwick and myself at a previous Policy and Resources Committee, was discussed by West Craven Area Committee. I think there was unanimous support at the last meeting to try and progress this suggestion, because what we have is Instavolt are willing to install 2 very rapid chargers on the Wellhouse Road car park in Barley. I understand that they're also interested in a site in Colne, and that in terms of the Bonalswick one, they would pay the totality of the installation costs, and they were offering £1,000 per year per charger for a term which from memory was something like 20 years, I think it was. So there's an income, there is a benefit to the town in terms of the destination charger. As someone that drives an electric vehicle, I'm forever looking on Zap Maps to find where the best chargers are, and to actually make a point of going to those places, because I know I can charge the car up quite reasonably speedily, and you know, to actually get this opportunity is great. We need to be seizing it with both hands. It's now been many months that this has been kicked around. The wider project to install EV charging points, I've seen the report, and it's talking about costs, actually paying people to put things in. Here's, you know, like gift horse in the mouth sort of thing, where we've got a company willing to make that investment, put Barnoldswick and potentially Cong as well on the map with a very fast EV charging, which people will make a beeline for, because if you've got a car and you're moving around, you know, it's no good having a 7 kilowatt charger. You know, you'd be spending hours trying to charge it up. That's what there is at the moment in both, well, in Nelson as well. But it really is an opportunity that we ought to be getting hold of, and not getting it confused with something that we're going to have to pay for as a council in order to get people putting something in. So I would propose that we do agree to the installation of EV charging points as proposed by Instavolt on the Wellhouse Road car park.
Thanks, Councillor Wick. Sarah Coleman, perhaps.
So this came to the last Climate Emergency Working Group, and I think it's been misrepresented, this report. There is an enormous amount of almost, you'd have to do really complex, if there is A-level Venn diagrams, you'd have to do A-level Venn diagrams to actually try to deconstruct all the whys and the wherefores here. There are ones that are free to Pendle Council but don't give any income. There are ones that are slow. There are ones that may be quick but we don't know about the electricity supply. There are ones that give some money for a bit of time and then taper off. There's every possible permutation. And I would be quite happy for Councillor Whips to go with this if this car park was owned by, say, the town council, because I suppose they could say it was a proof of concept. But really, we as Pendle Council, and we urge them to at the Climate Emergency Working Group, need to get to the bottom of the availability of electricity supply, because hidden in the small print of a lot of these sort of blandishments, because they all look good on the surface, these offers, hidden in the small print is, we will offer super fast charging, and then if you read, it says, unless of course there are other demands, or perhaps it's not available, in which case it'll be terrifyingly slow. And then you think that potentially you've signed up for an amazing thing that people will flock to, and you might find yourself with a lame duck, and that would be very embarrassing and sad. So I would like to propose that we go with the officer's recommendation, but we urge the officers to come to the end, perhaps using A-level Venn diagrams, to find the best solution for our various different dozens of Pendle car parks right across the borough, because it's important. 59% of people in Pendle live in a terraced house, and although there's lots of talk of conduits from houses to cars and different ways of doing it, we actually will get government money to help us really push this in, because a lot of our residents don't at the moment have a really, although there's been changes to the MPPF that all new properties have to have charging points, there's a lot of our residents, this is something that they can't access. So we owe it to them to choose the very best, and it would be silly, I feel, back to the passport to Pimlico that I discussed earlier, for Wellhouse Road car park to be, in a sense, Pendle's Pimlico. Let's get it right, and you know, really move ahead and put it across the whole of Pendle.
Okay. David Coleman-Price.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's one of those ones. There are myriad options here. To be wowed by one headline on one website to say, we'll promise you this supercharging thing, 20 years, it won't cost you anything. It's you know, there are other people to consider, there are resources to consider, there are supply issues to consider. You know, you don't know if it can support 120 kilowatts, and the small print will tell you that there are various get-outs for these companies. So I think it's responsible for Pendle to look at all the options, to start to research about the costs involved, the charging supplies involved in these sorts of applications, and the revenue implications as well. And I think it's all part of a Pendle-wide process, not to just do what you like wherever you like. So I second the recommendation.
Councillor David.
Well, Chairman, I think, you know, this is very demeaning of Councillor David Coleman-Price to say what he's just said. Here we have the initiative of Councillor Tom Witt, who's gone out under his own steam, found a company that has got investment capital put into new charging points, discussed with them the opportunities that there are in Pendle, which narrowed down specifically to Barnoldswick. And we've got a company that's willing to pay £20,000, or is it 2 times £20,000? Forgive me if I misremember that. Over a period of time for leases for 2 charging points, who, my recollection is very clear on this, would undertake all the discussions with the electricity provider, which is Northern Power Grid in this case, and you know, sort of deal with the whole thing. So there is no requirement, apart from drawing up the paperwork, for Pendle Council officers to spend the next 6 months going through the ins and outs of what's available, doing Venn diagrams, and working everything out. And, you know, in the meantime, you're doing exactly what I was saying at the earlier point in the meeting. You are passing up the opportunity to make an investment, not Pendle Council's investment in this case, a private company's investment in infrastructure which will actually reduce emissions. Now that's a reality, you know, and you've got form now because decision after decision after decision, you defer, you kick it down the road, you turn it down, and you don't make the right decision in terms of the climate crisis. Here you have an opportunity, you've got a willing commercial entity wanting to have the opportunity to make this investment, pay the council money, and say, no, we've got to look at, you know, sort of diddly squat charger here and another diddly squat charger there. You could do all of that. We've been talking about this, how many months is it? Is it 6 months ago?
6 months, yeah.
6 months ago. We could probably have the chargers in by now. But no, you'll kick it down the road for another 6 months. Well, I'm moving that we actually approve the EV chargers on the Wellhouse Road car park with Instavolt, and I hope that I get a secondary support not only from Labour members but from yourself, Chairman, who did vote for this when we discussed it at the area committee.
Point of clarification, Councillor Witt. I made it quite clear at both meetings that in my view the only way to do it was centralise it and go through a central point. I remember first at the first meeting you wanted the committee to sign up the lease and bypass Pendleborough. I refused to get involved in that. At the second meeting I just said, well, do whatever you're going to do, it's got to come to the policy and resource. It's got, in my view, still to be handled centrally. You can't go off at ad hoc ways when you're dealing with something like this. You've got a proposal.
But you have, Chairman, you can go ahead with this in isolation.
You've put a motion forward. Have you got a seconder, please?
Well, I hope I have.
Chairman, I've indicated to speak. I hope I can provide some clarity here because I think you're getting it very confused. 6 months ago, I asked the area committee to put a letter of intention to Instavolt accepting their offer that says basically, you know what, if you're happy, let me get my words right. It was basically saying, look, if Instavolt wants to do this, the council is open to it. And that would open the doors for Instavolt to do the studies that Councillor Sarah Corbyn-Price is looking at. They would look at the electric supply, they would do the feasibility of the location, and they would do that under their own steam with a letter of intent from the council. That's all that needed to be done 6 months ago. And the agreement of the lease after that would have been a whole separate, different decision. And we're still at that point now. We just need to send a letter with a letterhead saying, look, it's open to the idea, the council could do this. Could you write up a lease and do the investigations you need to do?
Well, I think the answer is clear. It's centralised. We've got a motion on the table.
Chairman, I would like to continue. It is a previous P&R committee. It was decided that car parks were an asset controlled by the area committees. This committee refused to pay for works on a car park in West Graven, a lorry park, I might add, because they claimed that it had to come from area committee capital. If the area committees are responsible for the capital of their site, then they are not a centrally held asset. They're not.
Essentially, I haven't.
Yeah.
Sorry, but they are.
Yeah. Look, can we you haven't got a seconder, I don't think, Councillor.
Well, that's a shame, isn't it? Thank you, Labour colleagues.
On that basis, the proposal we've got is we go with the officer's recommendation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we've got a seconder of that as well. All those in favour of that?
Chairman, just before we go to the vote, I just have a...
Yes, please do. Yeah, please.
I know, Julie, we're working on Trafalgar House, and some of the proposals around Trafalgar House and the rear of Trafalgar House also deal with EV charging points. As part of this recommendation, obviously, there's going to be a wider sort of investigation into various different providers, different setups, different nitty-gritty details, because some of that sounded like Sky Broadband to me, in terms of how you can be let down with respect, with the finer detail, unfortunately. And I think it's important that if it is going to be a Pendle-wide, project, that if we've got an opportunity potentially, if that's the line that the board go down, of treating this as a pilot, at the rear of Trafalgar House, if that is, like I said, one of the options. So I think it's important that we do look at some of the points that have been raised here tonight, and then hopefully look to implement those across the borough. So I just want to point that out, Chair.
Okay. Right. All those in favour of the recommendation from the officers on this one? Right, that's carried. We're now on to the last but certainly not least, 13B. Have we already done this one? No, it was the other one. Right, land adjoining 54 Carlton Street, Nelson. Who wants to?
I'll be second, but I think that's
yeah, Chairman, can I propose that we to carry out the recommendation that was passed by Nelson and Brackley Committee on this?
Second lecture.
Thank you. So,
just to declare the land as surplus, Chairman.
Yeah, that's your, okay. Sarah Coleman.
You're not going to be surprised. We had a visit and the lovely trees are there. And it's in a place, actually, which is even less vegetation and greenness than Brunswick Street. And I went and chatted to a chap who was sitting on his doorstep looking at the trees. And I said, oh, hello, what do you think of this? And he said, there's been fridges. So I looked, and it was down a side street, there was a fridge, not on the land, and then adjacent, diagonal, another fridge. And then he said, the council will not take the fridges. I said, well, the council can take the fridges, they are flighted, but they're not on this piece of land. And the piece of land has obviously had money spent on it by Pendle Council. So unlike the other one, there's no car parking on it whatsoever. It is just at the end of this street, this little piece of amenity land. And David saw me chatting to the chap sitting on his doorstep and said, you know what, he doesn't need to sit on his doorstep. If we had a bench, he could enjoy the trees right next to them. Yeah. And that piece piece of land is the only green that those terrace streets have. And it would be, there wasn't a parking problem, and we went at peak home time, didn't we, tonight?
Absolutely.
So you'd think that there would be a parking problem if there was going to be, because quite often streets don't have lots of cars parking during the day. So there wasn't a parking problem at all. You could park all over the place. And I just think it would be really, really sad for us to get rid of the only bit of amenity space that those couple of streets have. The fridges are a side issue. They weren't on the land. I will write to Mr. Walker in the morning and point out where the fridges are, and they can go. I think it is really sad to say that this area should go just because some people have done fly tipping. And in Trawden, what we do, and I'm sad that this is on camera, is we capture them on CCTV and then they don't do it again. And Pendle Council could do that in hotspot places, and I think Pendle Council should do that. When they tried it before, they had the sort of wrong cameras. They were super expensive, visible cameras, and they were stolen. And then they tried low-res tiny cameras, and they weren't good enough. But now the technology's moved on, and I feel certain that in areas where it is repeated, Pendle Council can catch these people and stop the fly tipping. And that's a message we should be sending out. So I propose that we don't go with this recommendation, but keep this green space for these residents.
And I'll second that as well, because over the road you could see where there was a similar patch of land, which has obviously been sold off to somebody, and they built a whacking great extension, full-size 2-storey extension there, just to complete the street scene. So you have pavement terrace, and you don't have any sort of green space, recreation space or whatever. I think it's a shame if you're going to get rid of these bits. You know, we just did the exercise in Kerry looking at sort of pocket parks and edges of streets, etc. And the idea of retaining those so they've got some sort of value for the local community rather than just houses, houses, houses and nothing else. So I support the let's keep.
Okay, so we've got a motion and
that's the motion, and that's the amendment.
And that's the amendment. Right, so we do the amendment first. Yes?
Okay.
So the amendment is we don't dispose of the land. Yes?
And we love the land, and I
You
think
love
we
the
put
land.
a bench on it, and we
That's-
asked Nelson
The
Parish
nice
Council, Town Council, put a
Put
bench
some
on it.
bench
Yeah.
on it, right.
Recommendation, Nelson
So
Town
that,
Council.
okay, so we've got a motion, we've got a supporter. All those in favour of not disposing of the land, but continuing to look after it as a green space with benches on for the gentleman to sit on. Yes?
Yes.
All those against? Oh.
He looked uncomfortable on that step, he really did.
You need to
So
win
the
through the trees.
substantial-
All back to full council, that's it.
The substantial motion is now to be voted on. So, finally, we keep the land, look after it as a green space. All those in favour? Good man, proud of you. Proud of you. Well done. Right, thank you very, very much. We'll wish good for Kettle, Mooresdale, well, and thank everybody for putting up with me and getting through, and thank you very, very much for some good content.